Welcome to Expanding Frontiers Research, everyone. I want to just thank all of you who are listening. Jim, thanks for staying up late with us. And I want to thank Peter from Bogota, Colombia. Shadowy Spectrums, you should definitely go to his YouTube page and check out the wonderful work that Peter is doing. Mario, I appreciate your work behind the scenes. And I want to thank all of the people that support the show with their kind donations. As most of you know who have been listening to my show, I've been doing this for many, many years now, and I have a passion for making mistakes, for weaving through landmines. But my ultimate goal is finding the truth so each and every one of us can feel empowered. And that's a very difficult thing to do in the UFO world, and nothing can drive that home more than what we've seen in the past couple weeks since the Chinese spy balloon was shot down. And in that time, we've seen a lot of people using the UFO narrative and things, and aliens are here and this and that. And I think it is very interesting in a historical perspective to actually look back and see how the UFO topic has been used by the powers that be to distract from our technology. So tonight's going to be a really cool night. I am going to have my friend Jack Brewer and Barry Greenwood will be on the show as well. We're going to discuss this, and then we're also going to discuss the bombshell that we broke back in November. Skinwalker cast members received $175K in county economic funds, and that was a really pivotal and important article to highlight the type of, I believe, unfortunately, misusing taxpayer funding, promoting through the Travel and Tourism Board, promoting things that aren't in the best interest. I think it would be one thing if it was a festival where we're just talking about paranormal ideas and all of that and just having fun. But this isn't that. This is a place where people are going and they're alleging that people are getting cancer. They're alleging that people are dying. To me, that isn't fun. And to me, that is certainly not the way that we should be allocating taxpayer funding and promoting our state. So with the work that Jack Brewer did on all of this through Expanding Frontiers Research, Nate Carlisle from Fox 13 did a piece last Sunday right after the Super Bowl, and that piece was Skinwalker's Bigfoot and UFOs discussed at Tax Finance Conference in Utah. It was a great piece, and perhaps we'll play it later tonight if we don't get too busy talking, but I definitely recommend going to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out that news piece, and then to also go back and look at the important articles and research that we are doing to contribute things to this community, and not only the UFO community, but in a much larger sense. I'm extremely proud of the people that I work with. I'm extremely excited about the new direction that we are going, and I think this is going to be an incredible year. I know it is. It's already started off pretty amazing. So on that note, I want to just, again, thank everybody in chat. You guys rock. And I can see all your comments. It's Steve and Simon and Jim and UFO John Doe and Scott. Thank you all very much for getting in here and supporting the show, being here with us. We have a group of friends, even though we've never met each other in person. We all have a kind heart. We all have a passion for truth. And we all want to make sure that we're not stepping in too many landmines along the way, and we're willing to share our experiences. And I think that's a very powerful thing, and I'm very excited to be here with all of you. And so without further ado, I'm just going to bring Jack in really quickly. And so Jack Brewer, my partner in crime, you have done such exceptional work over the years with the UFO trail, and I know that we've talked about this a bit on many, many shows, but you have I remember first meeting or hearing about you and just, kind of being, oh my gosh, what's happening? This guy is kind of a skeptic. But I respected that about you. And the more that I learned about the community and the dangers that I have seen firsthand with giving people disinformation, misinformation, the more I was really, really drawn to your work and felt that you were somebody that I could respect and that I wanted to work with. And so it was really cool when you reached out to me And then we decided to form our nonprofit, Expanding Frontiers Research. That's been very empowering for me, and you have done exceptional work.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I am elated with what we have accomplished. And since the time that I did reach out to you early in mid 2022 and we're discussing ideas, it has gone better than I had hoped it would. I mean, it's been better than I would have even hoped. You are a pleasure to work with, easy to communicate with, and thank you. It's rewarding and I enjoy it as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. It's nice to do something that you're dedicating so much time and so much of our financial resources to get off the ground and things. It's nice to know that we're doing that and we're having a good time and that we know we're accomplishing things that are definitely turning heads. And that the latest, the November piece that you did that we researched behind the scenes, that was really important. And I think the repercussions of that are now being felt, especially because we had the Fox 13 coverage, and now you've got people in Utah who are obviously maybe a little embarrassed, maybe rethinking the way they're going to designate funding, and maybe they might check the way that they're looking at speakers to pay thousands upon thousands of dollars to. So I think that's a really, really cool thing.
Yeah, I think where this becomes of interest to mainstream journalists, investigative reporters, is when it gets out of just the UFO scene and into other aspects of life, like public funding, tax funds. I'm reminded of when the 2017 story broke about the Pentagon UFO program, the ATIP, the OSAP, what have you. I'm reminded how that brought journalists in having a look at it, because it was no longer then just about late night talk radio and fringe paperback writers. It brought in real defense contractors, um, real public spending on this, and there were people, reporters, that wanted to follow that and see some accountability on it. And I think we see similar in Uinta County and its use of public funds, and some of the consultants it has selected to award contracts and $175,000 between three counties collectively, that our records requests did not indicate what they got in return for that money. And it may very well be a real good deal and great work, but the records do not show that's the case. And it's curious that the county commissioners don't want to talk to us about it either, which is typically not something you see when someone is proud of decisions that have been made and want to uh, highlight the work that was accomplished.
Absolutely. And I think that's been the more I've looked into things specifically here in Utah, with many different aspects, it has been rather shocking and alarming to me as somebody who was born and raised in Utah to see this type of thing taking place. And we all know that sometimes when you've got the small communities and things, there are a lot of things that could take place. There's not a lot of accountability sometimes. And for me, when I watched when the story that Nate Carlisle did when he was talking to the head of tourism, Alicia, it was interesting for me to see how even through all of the information that's coming forward, that she was still going to double down on what was being said. And so I don't know. It's quite curious to me.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting part of Mr. Carlisle's uh, story and film clip. When we did the story, I spoke with Miss Coltharp also, and I did find that significant that she was like with Mr. Carlisle, explicitly stated she had no concerns about misinformation. That just wasn't her concern, not what travel and tourism is about. And I can appreciate that to a certain extent, where I think we run into a situation, to me, where the rubber hits the road is the difference between a some type of festival about folklore or mythic people, Paul Bunyan festival, something like that. Is I don't think that people that are celebrating folklore are presenting it as scientific investigation. I'm not aware of that being the case. And that is something that is specifically exclusive and unique about Skinwalker Ranch, that they even frequently state that themselves, that they claim to be a heavily studied scientifically a region. And after all these years, don't, to the best of my knowledge, so much as have a working hypothesis. So there's only a few ways to start looking at that. And like I say, where the rubber hits the road is all research is not scientific, and all conferences and all television
Right.
shows don't have to be scientific. But when the members of a team claim that it is scientific, then by definition, there are certain specific ways they should conduct themselves. And when they don't, then at best, we have people that don't understand the meaning of scientific investigation at best.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's very apparent, and it's been apparent for many, many years now. And it's great to do the old kind of the soft shoe, look over here. Well, wait a minute, we're not actually doing anything over here, but we're going to push you to a website where you have to spend money, buy a membership, and do things. And we're going to just have videos of us sitting around talking instead of actually showing the science behind what they're doing. And then to not only go there, but then you've got the fact that they're going out into public, I mean, since day one, and telling people that this is, I mean, are there gods and demons, is this satanic, what's going on. The first show, like I've mentioned many many times, but the first show on the History Channel was them, a certain Fugel's brother and Travis Taylor flying over the Mesa Skinwalker Ridge, and they were saying a prayer. So it's none of it from the get go has been scientific. And again, you don't things are transparent when you're engaging in real investigations, and that's never been the case. And I know that things are, there are a lot of people that will continue to follow that, that don't have an education in what's going on, and I'm sure it will continue to make a handful of people a lot of money over the years. But hopefully we've done a good enough job that people have a good foundation to find us and make the right decisions when they decide whether they want to go down that rabbit hole.
Well put, and I can understand those perspectives. I'd add to it that one of the things that stand out to me is the conflict of interest that arises when a group claims to be conducting a scientific investigation, yet has a financial interest in promoting an unverified narrative, a UFO, goblins, whatever we want to call it, narrative, and that they're paid at various events, go on tour, promoted by the History Channel, various things, and creates a income for these people. You can look at their Facebook pages and see the different events they do and how they promote various business interests and things during it. Some of them do. So it just to not call that a conflict of interest is to simply redefine what conflict of interest means.
Absolutely. And there are really great people in that community. And over the years, I've met many of them. And I think that it's, they're, when you look at, and I want to go back to kind of what Leisha Coltharp is saying, what our numbers have found through the investigation, through the grammar requests that we've done. But it is very interesting for them to claim how much benefit this was to economics in Vernal. And my thought is, and everybody's thought should be, how are you tracking that? You can't even tell us how many tickets were sold. You can't give us a factual number on how many people were there, where they went. When I was at the conference up there, we were in this facility, and then we had a break. We went out. There were food trucks there. And then we went back in, and everybody was so exhausted. When we were done, nobody wanted to stop in little shops. There wasn't time for it. Nobody was supporting, local grocery stores or things. And when they were coming into town, they were staying in hotels that were, the big majority of the business there are hotels that are chain owned by, they're not locally owned. And another thing too, which I mentioned before, the fact that the tourism, that is the height of the season. That is right at the very end. And how can you calculate who's here to see Dinosaur Land? How can you calculate who's here to see the petroglyphs? There's so many, or to go mountain bike riding at McCoy Flats. There's so many things. And unless somebody really has their numbers in a row, how can you possibly say that this has been the boom in tourism that they're claiming it's been? You can't. The numbers are not there.
I understand. And yes, again, it would seem that if you had a really good case to make for that, you'd make it instead of, they've been asked repeatedly to put something in a report, a document, other than just, a verbal statement of how great the conference is. And that only thing we've managed to obtain, and the same for Nate Carlisle and Fox News, to the best of my knowledge, Fox 13, was the same documents that Expanding Frontiers Research obtained that indicate the line items, what the expenditures were, and that on top of the tens of thousands of dollars that were paid to speakers, many of which were associated with the secret of Skinwalker. On top of that, there were consulting contracts with a company founded by Brandon Fugel and Thomas Winterton to the tune of $175,000 collectively, that commissioners did not want to discuss with us or explain if they were pleased with the work or not. And Thomas did talk with us. Mr. Winterton talked with me. It's in the blog post. He adamantly supports and defends his consulting firm, but again, does not present any documentation of exactly what was received. And as the one blog post pointed out, an important part of all this is the process. How were these people selected? who was in this decision-making process that these consultants would be paid these fees. And the same goes with the conference. We know, as Nate Carlisle also pointed out, that at least one of the committee members on the organizing committee for Phenomicon are paid thousands of dollars for their participation at the conference. So there should be a process that can be identified about how those people are selected, and who gets to have a $5,000 speaker fee, and who has to pay to have a vendor table in the lobby. There should be a clear path to how those decisions are made.
Absolutely. And I think, some people out there could say, well, what's the big deal? But the big deal is most conferences aren't paid for completely by, taxpayer money.
UFO conferences,
Right.
right?
And so it is UFO conferences. And so it's that to me is amazing. And also the fact that the recreation center, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. I mean, you've got that being donated basically for several days. And I mean, I think the thing that is not being accounted for is how many people are paid by the government to staff that facility. I don't think we've seen any of that. We haven't seen what it costs for electricity. We haven't seen any of the other details that need to be brought to light about all of this, because that in and of itself is a huge expense. And so why are there people in the community that they have to rent the property to host events? Why do they have to do that when Phenomicon and the powers that be are making thousands of dollars personally and then getting this facility for free? I think that should be, I think that there's
Yeah,
lots
if
more
it's such a
questions.
great idea and it works so well, then underwrite it yourself.
Right. Absolutely. So many questions, and hopefully we can get Barry on the call later on the interview. He's had a family tragedy in the past couple of days. His sister passed away, and so we are just wishing him the best, and hopefully we will see him. But let's transition now and then we'll come back to the Skinwalker thing later, because I think this is just getting good, and there will definitely be much more to come out in a public sense on that. And let's talk a little bit about your interview that you did today with Brett Tingley. So give us a little warm up for that before we play it.
Yes, Brett Tingley was part of the team at the Drive that did, in my opinion, some of the most salient reporting on what became known as the UAP situation since the now increasingly infamous 2017 New York Times story and Politico breaking the ATIP OSAP. So I reached out to Brett Tingley and asked him if he'd spend a few minutes talking with me, and he agreed. And I hope that folks will find his comments helpful. And we discussed what some of this means, how we might interpret it, and how we might look for more in the future.
Excuse me. Anyway, hey, I mean, this is like 24 minutes in. This is great. So I'm very happy that you did the interview, and I wish I could have been there. I'm sure it was absolutely fascinating. And so we're going to play the interview that Jack Brewer did earlier this afternoon with Brett, and this will be fun. And then we will catch you after the interview. So stick around and chat. We'll have more time to talk, definitely. And thanks, you guys, for getting in there and making such great comments. Here we go.
With Expanding Frontiers Research. I'm here today with Brett Tingley, editor of space.com and formerly a writer on defense and aerospace issues with the War Zone, The Drive, Popular Mechanics, and other high-profile media outlets. Thanks for joining me today, Brett.
Absolutely, Jack. Anytime.
Thank you. So we have all of these reports. We've got reported air incursions, UAP reported shoot downs. The president addresses the nation. What's your takeaway at this point?
Well, I'm honestly more confused than I was a few weeks ago. Now we're hearing that some of these objects might be perfectly benign. They might be civilian research projects. President Biden's comments this week certainly didn't do much to clear up the confusion for a lot of people. We've got objects shot down over the United States now, and it seems only one of them has actually been confirmed to be a foreign surveillance platform. So what we're left with appears to be a lot of confusion on a lot of people's parts. It seems, NORAD may have been a little jumpy, may have had an itchy trigger finger, so to speak, erring inside of caution by taking objects down that they couldn't identify, that weren't catalogs. And some of the things that some of us have been saying for years, that we need a better catalog, a better inventory of what exactly is in American airspace, has been pushed to the forefront by these recent events. But again, there's still a lot of confusion. The federal government hasn't been perfectly transparent on this. And of course, there's some issues on which they can't be transparent. But what's clear is that finally, it seems like the White House is taking a whole of government approach to figuring out what is in our airspace and what can be done to make it safer.
And it seems to get somewhat politicized. It depends on what outlet you follow and whose quotes you follow as to how significant any given circumstance may be. I know at the drive, you guys did some of the more salient reporting on the UAP situation as it grew out of 2017. And that encouraged some people like me to learn more about drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, and to find out there are just all kinds of objects in the sky, balloons, that they're not just these drones that might be used for forceful strikes as weapons, but also electronic warfare and hacking, taking electronic information. Could you talk some about that and the capabilities of drones and what they're doing these days, and what state-sponsored drones might want that are up there?
Sure. That's a huge question. I think whole books could be written on that. We just like we've seen with our, consumer technologies like our phones, miniaturization has really hit the entire electronics industry. So what used to take, a helicopter the size of a school bus can now be done in a helicopter that can, fit on a table. So of uncrewed systems has led to just all being out there. We've got hybrid UAVs that can have some of the characteristics of a balloon, some of the characteristics of a drone. We've got UAVs and all sorts of platforms that can land, or all sorts of configurations for landing vertically, for hovering over areas for a long period of time. That's really a very huge question to try and dig at. I mean, basically what we've seen is that the entire UAV industry has been proliferating for a number of uses: consumer uses, industrial uses, and of course the military has been right there. The militaries of the world have been right there with it. Surveillance, intelligence, reconnaissance, that's obviously a huge area that UAVs are now moving into, because you no longer need a huge aircraft like a U-2 spy plane circling over an area. You can send a much smaller platform. You can send an uncrewed platform. You don't have to put, human crews at risk. Them just within the past decade, becoming more prevalent in, like you mentioned, electronic warfare and signals intelligence. So now instead of just putting a camera, putting an eye in the sky, You can put all sorts of sensors up in the sky to collect information on radio communication, on radar transmissions, on even Wi-Fi networks. So basically, any kind of intelligence, any kind of information you want to gather, there's a UAV out there that can fulfill that role these days. As we've seen in the war in Ukraine, right? People can take off-the-shelf hobby-level drones and modify them with only a few dollars worth of parts to drop grenades with high levels of accuracy and precision. So if you just think about what's being done in surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, we've seen that the same level of revolution come to those mission sets too. I think what we've seen over the past few years and what the past few weeks particularly have shown is that the federal government, the Department of Defense, intelligence agencies are historically slow to change. And the UAV industry, UAV innovation has kind of outpaced many of these institutions' abilities to keep track of the capabilities and how to mitigate threats. One of my favorite cases to think about is a story I reported on over at the War Zone took place in Tucson, Arizona, back in 2021, where this drone evaded a Customs and Border Patrol helicopter and a Tucson Police Department helicopter for over an hour. Was literally flying circles around them and then took off up to 14,000 feet and outran them. So you think about, there are a lot of unknowns out there in terms of the capabilities of some of these smaller platforms, law enforcement, and particularly in national security and the military. We don't have a lot of defenses to counter them. And in some cases, we don't have a lot of ability to track them or even identify them. Because, as some of these balloon or some of these object incidents over the past few weeks have shown, things that are smaller than, say, an automobile can be very hard to identify or even locate from the air when you're in a fast-moving aircraft. In the case of that Tucson drone, both helicopter crews had a difficult time acquiring it visually because, it's probably only, 3 to 6 feet in diameter. It's probably a larger quadcopter or a larger hexcopter. But, our sensors and even our training for pilots hasn't really kept up with the fact that we do have these smaller, much more highly maneuverable things in the air these days.
Thank you. And when you say they can stay up extended periods of time, like could you give us some idea there of how long can unmanned vehicles stay in the air?
Well, it depends on the configuration. Depends on how much power is being used by that platform. So let's say if you've got a sensor ball on a large quadcopter that's very power intensive, obviously that's going to, take away from your battery life. So that's a pretty broad question, and it really depends on the configuration. However, in general, what I can say is I think most people would be surprised by the endurance of a lot of these military level and industrial level UAVs now. I mean, endurance of well over an hour is not that uncommon anymore for some of these larger platforms. And, some of the U.S. Department of Defense laboratories have tested hybrid UAVs. That's fixed wing and a quadcopter, kind of qualities of both blended together into one. You can call it a hybrid vertical takeoff and lift platform. Some of those platforms have been able to stay in the air upwards of, a dozen hours or so. But again, it all depends on the configuration. With more power intensive payloads, you're going to see less endurance. But some of the hybrid UAVs we've seen that are mixing lighter than air lift systems, like say a balloon, some of those can stay up in the air indefinitely. There's a company, Raven Aerostar, that my colleague at the War Zone, Adam Kehoe, has reported on. Those can stay in the air for weeks, sometimes at a time. They can adjust their altitude in order to take advantage of different wind patterns, and they can hover over an area, for multiple days, if not weeks. But again, like all things in advanced aerospace development, we probably have no idea what the true state of the art is in some of these really advanced, military funded, federally funded UAV projects. But again, we'd have to go platform by platform, configuration by configuration. But just in general, I think the UAVs will surprise people. Yes, a hobbyist drone, a consumer level drone will probably only give you a half hour to an hour endurance. But again, I always go back to that Tucson drone, right? That thing, it was already in the air when the law enforcement helicopter saw it, and then it was able to perform, high velocity maneuvers around them and then take off up to 14,000 feet, and it never ran out of power. So, that case, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of a touchstone for me. I always tell people about that. Like, if you really think a drone isn't capable of high performance, high endurance flight, go listen to those air traffic control recordings. Go read that police report, and you might be surprised what you find out. And again, that's just one case, and we don't even know what platform that was. The U.S. Navy has been testing some very interesting hybrid UAV platforms, like the Martin VBAT. I actually think Martin was bought out. I think it's field now. The VBAT drone in the air for, 6 hours.
Thank you. So it's kind of sounding like we have your store level drones that are for hobbyists and people might be doing things with that can be modified. We of course have state sponsored, highly efficient and evolved, state of the art in many instances, technology and aircraft. And then we probably have corporate and contractors and private concerns. Even in organized crime, it might be reasonable to think are operating at some level. Is that a reasonable take on the situation?
It's interesting to look at where a lot of the mystery drone cases have taken place. We see them a lot in America's Southwest, where, of course, we see a lot of narcotics trafficking. And I mean, there are dozens of cases documented where some of these cartels that are operating south of America's border possess, incredibly sophisticated drone technologies. And again, we see some of these hybrid VTOL, hybrid vertical takeoff and lift, where it has fixed wings for horizontal flight, but also has rotors where it can hover and take off and land vertically. Some of them are as large as an automobile, 6-7 feet wingspan. And big platforms like that with high endurance could be bought for $10,000-$20,000, which is a lot for your average hobbyist. But for something like a cartel, organized crime ring, like you mentioned, not even to go into governmental agencies, that's not that much money. So yeah, we have seen an extensive case record of the cartels, the organized crime in Central America, using these platforms to either surveil law enforcement or to actually deliver, narcotics, potentially even across the border in some of these cases. So yeah, it goes back to this thing that there's been this rapid explosion in technology, this rapid advancement in capabilities, and kind of law enforcement and governmental response has been slow, as it as it has been throughout history whenever we see these rapid technological shifts.
And then it's a whole nother topic of how a somewhat of a trailing indicator of the situation is the lobbying in Washington and the contractors that are soliciting funds, proposing projects to try to increase awareness. And some of them arguably have courted the UFO community. And projects like the Galileo project come to mind, of kind of focusing upon what might be extraterrestrial intelligence. And this just creates a whole nother complication. I realize, again, that is a very broad topic there. Any general thoughts on how these things could play out?
Yeah, I've said this for years now, but I kind of see there's two separate texts, and they tend to overlap at times, and maybe some people have intentionally tried to overlap them. But we have kind of the search for intelligence, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. We have a long history of people reporting anomalous things in the sky, and then we have over here the explosion of UAV technologies. We have what seems to be an uptick in foreign surveillance programs, and yeah, at times the line between them has been kind of blurred, and you can certainly imagine that intelligence agencies, either domestic or foreign, might want to intentionally blur that line to obscure what they are doing over here in the surveillance realm or kind of in the UAV realm. But personally, I wish that the two topics could kind of remain separate more, although like this past week has shown, the past weeks, sometimes that line, sometimes you can't distinguish them, right? Here we had NORAD going after unknown contacts, unknown objects. Of course, anybody who's listening for certain keywords, who's always looking for something anomalous or unknown in the sky, is going to seize on those. But if you're looking at it from the other angle, of course, then what you're going to hear or see in those reports is perhaps this is a foreign surveillance project. Perhaps this is a U.S. government surveillance project, because, just on a quick side note, just as maybe foreign governments want to surveil within the United States, there are undisclosed domestic surveillance programs in the United States as well. There's been a lot of companies who have developed these amazing cameras that can be installed on an aircraft, and the aircraft can just circle at a high altitude, 40,000 feet above a city, and literally record a whole history of everything that happened below it. And those cameras, you can zoom in on the footage and read license plates and things like that. So yeah, the UFO phenomenon, if you will, the UFO topic at times does overlap with the topic or the history of black projects, of secret projects, of government surveillance. And so I think it's natural for those two things to blur, but I think it would be easier to get at the mysteries of both of those things if we were able to better tease them apart. But again, as we're seeing this month, sometimes it can be difficult to tease them apart because of the overlaps in language used to describe these incidents too.
Yeah, absolutely. That, of course, NORAD is interested in radar paints. I mean, they want to know what those are, and to the demographic that follows UAP and UFOs and sees them as some mysterious other, there's not going to be a lot of difference between one radar paint and another. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was reporting on the Tucson drone incident that I've mentioned a few times, there were people on social media who kept asking me, why are you calling it a drone? Why are you calling this a drone? And of course, eventually we got, the police reports and mission logs that said, they eventually did. They just couldn't tell configuration. Yeah, it's tough because, again, we haven't caught up to our kind of situational awareness, and I mean that term broadly. Our law enforcement, militaries, even the FAA haven't really caught up with how prevalent some of the unmanned are in the air these days. Yet perhaps there are some instances where the term drone is just thrown out there as a catch-all. But I think, what else are you going to call a small flying object these days? That's clearly man-made. I'll say that, right?
Yeah,
of
like
course,
what would you presume it is if not right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I understand, right, that presuming to know the nature of something before you've conclusively identified is problematic. But and, you know, that goes both ways, right? If people want to call things proof of extraterrestrial presence without any proof, and people want to call everything a drone without proof. But you know, just to talk about the Tucson case, for example, like, you know, we had from day one the FBI reporting it as a drone, that kind of thing. So yeah, I just to go back to your question a minute ago, like, what else would you call it these days, without leaping to perhaps fallacious thinking? You know, but again, that can be problematic because just as like this past week has shown with these objects shot down, a lot of times we don't know what these objects are that people are saying.
Yes, and this past week gave us a good example of, because you see a Chinese balloon on one day doesn't mean the object the next day is the same thing you saw yesterday as well. Yeah,
Right.
but along those lines, how do you think the media could most responsibly report these incidents?
Well, that's a tricky question. I think obviously we should, you know, stick to the facts. But when you've seen, as we've seen, when, you know, our leaders, our government aren't very transparent or aren't transparent at all, then, you know, we're left. Some people in the media are left to speculate sometimes because, you know, something like a huge Chinese balloon, a huge Chinese spy balloon in the sky is obviously going to create levels of panic, levels of worry for some people. And people are hungry for answers. They're still hungry for answers. So obviously, you know, media outlets are going to jump on that hunger and want to put out as much information as they can, even if they don't have a lot of concrete answers. Yeah, that just sticking to the facts, I think is the best way we can do it. And, you know, just personally, I know we've tried to only report, you know, what has come out of official outlets. But it's tricky, you know, when there's not a lot of transparency and when there is such a hunger for answers.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Brett is editor at space.com. Tell us about what you're doing there and what your team's currently working on, Brett.
Well, you know, space.com, we try to be a one-stop shop for all things space. We cover space flight, we cover astronomy, we cover sky watching, what you can see in the sky. We also cover space themed entertainment, you know, the latest in Star Trek, Star Wars, things like that. So every day is a different adventure there. The space flight industry is, you know, really taking off these days, literally. And even the, you know, astronomical community is going through a wild revolution right now because of the James Webb Space Telescope and other advanced instruments that we've put into orbit lately. So never a dull day in reporting on the space news, I can tell you that.
Well, good for you. I hope things go great. And again, I want to thank you for taking some time and joining me and talking this afternoon.
And so what a great interview, Jack. I mean, that I know you had technical difficulties on both sides, but I mean, I'm going to go back and listen to that again and again, as people in chat were mentioning. This is full of a lot of important details, and that must have been frustrating for you to have the technical difficulties, but there were some great nuggets in there, and it is a very special privilege to have him on the show.
It is. I really appreciate Brett Tingley spending some time with me this afternoon, and I highly recommend his work at space.com, as well as his previous articles at The Drive and Tyler Rogaway's team there. Brett mentioned Adam Kehoe during the interview, and some others, in my opinion, did some of the more relevant work on the UAP topic. I highly recommend going and checking it out. you can only become more informed. We might not agree with all of Mr. Rogaway's takes on everything. We don't have to, but I feel like they do a good job of separating their analysis from presenting the facts. And even if we don't agree with some of that analysis, they certainly have qualified opinions that they are entitled to. And as we get more down into the finer details, it shouldn't be overlooked as well that what we're really are in agreement and talking about here is there's a lot of stuff in the sky. People that were not sensationalizing this topic have known this was coming for years, that there would be a inundation of man-made aircraft in all kinds of shapes and sizes with advanced maneuverability. And we need to just presume that that's what we're talking about in these reports until something significantly suggested otherwise. I mean, it's just kind of, and I feel like we all, the credible sites are in agreement on that. Whereas I say, when you get into the finer details of who's doing what in Washington and what defense agencies should be doing and have been doing, then we might start having some differences in opinion. But the bottom line is, indeed, let's all be sensible about this and look at it through some rational lenses.
Absolutely. And I think that is where, all of us who are listening to the show tonight have the same consensus. We want to be rational. We want to make sure. And I think his comments about making sure there's more of a delineation between this type of study and then what's taking place. And I think that's really important. And I would encourage people that are really, that are trying to research the topic and getting out there and doing field research and care about the subject. I would definitely maybe run for the hills instead of getting on UFO Twitter and, hey, is it UFOs? The aliens are coming, the government's, pushing us away from all of this. And, definitely remove yourself and honestly not even get on UFO Twitter. I think that's a toxic psyop, pretty much. But so that is important to have that delineation. But how do we, and I know that we've got this government obfuscation, and if I could speak English tonight, I'd be super stoked. But you know what I'm trying to say? So it's just, the whole thing is very interesting, and I'm excited to have Barry on. I spoke with him briefly, and he will be on a little bit later, so that will be good to get him to weigh in, especially in a historical perspective, again, because that's very important. But it's fascinating. And I wanted to say too, you can go to, there's a really good blog that you can read, and this is Brent Crumley, dronedj.com. I've looked at his stuff before, and this is dated September 20th, 2021. Tyson police evading super drone quadcopter with propellers reflect light. And he mentions Brett and his work on this. And it is really interesting when you start going around, and I would suggest everybody does this, but when you look at your local communities, how many of these sightings have been reported? I know here in Salt Lake, there have been numerous reports over the past few years about drones that are flying dangerously close to the flight path for the Salt Lake International Airport. So, what's going on there? And I would recommend, I think it's fascinating to look into some of these things and then look into the policies in place to protect airline traffic, commercial and military, and some of the, policies in place now from the federal government. To me, another interesting thing too, to watch Biden talk about how they fine-tuned the radar, and now they're finding all of these things that are flying, 20,000 feet and in flight corridors that could potentially kill a lot of people. I mean, it's just fascinating that all of this is coming to light now.
It
Allegedly.
is fascinating. And that's where I feel like the politicization of the topic plays in. I can't help but wonder somewhat why now? Why does exactly what's the chain of events that lead these to being news stories? How much is it released by the White House or different federal agencies because they want coverage of what they're doing at this point? I don't know, but these types of things cross my mind. Another fascinating aspect of it is, as Brett mentioned, there's different levels of law enforcement surveillance from FBI and federal to state to local. Brett also mentioned, the potential for organized crime with drones. And that kind of has me thinking it was always advantageous to various military agencies for this to get enmeshed with and confused with the UFO topic. But now we have whole other demographics of law enforcement and organized crime that would just as soon people think that they're seeing a interdimensional vehicle than something that they have put up. And I can tell you and the audience as well that here in Orlando in recent years, a private individual, a citizen, informed me of a sighting they had late at night that they did not interpret to be otherworldly or paranormal. They felt that they were looking at a man-made craft that they described as triangle shaped. It's very difficult to tell the size of something in the sky, but they were under the impression it was relatively small, like perhaps the size of a drone that you could carry, possibly. And they said that it did not seem very high in the air and was just hovering over a neighborhood. And my first thought about that was some type of criminal electronic hacking, that you could put on a platform something to scan houses and see what might could be lifted off of computers that aren't protected or personal devices or things like that. I recall some 8 or 9 years ago doing a blog post about a couple of guys that out of their garage, and like I say, this has been nearly 10 years ago, they built a handheld flying vehicle, looked like a little model plane that had a computer about the size of a pack of cigarettes, was the way they described it. And they won a contest with it. It was supported by some agency, I forget which. And they called it a WASP, WASP, if anyone wants to look it up. And this drone could hover, it could be pre-programmed for a flight route, and this computer, handheld, size of a pack of cigarettes, could fool cell phones into thinking that it was the tower, and it would intercept cell phone transmissions. So just, let your imagination fill in the rest of what all you might could pull off of cell phones or other electronic transmissions that you can do that. And like I say, these were just guys that knew electronics and built it in literally in their garage.
Wow.
So you can give some thought to what an agency with a $1 billion budget could put together. Hello, Barry.
Barry, it's nice to see you. And thank you for being here, and hopefully you can hear us. I think Barry's getting his bearings straight. So yeah, I think you might need to check your settings, Barry. Okay. We'll we'll remove Barry really quickly, and then hopefully he can find his settings so we can hear really quickly. And then we'll ask him back, and I'm just going to shoot him off a text really quickly, too. And so, I mean, Jack, continue
Sure,
with your train of thought. So
sure, you go ahead with that. So yeah, if a contractor, an agency has a significant budget, well then obviously they can just do all kinds of things. Pretty much, if you can imagine it, there is an agency working on it. I'd imagine several of you are familiar with DARPA, the Defense Advanced I can't spit that out, but DARPA, that is known as the Mad Science Division of the intelligence community, and they go for high risk, high reward projects, and they are known for funding things that probably won't work, but that is part of their strategy is to throw enough things on the wall that the ones that do make it really worthwhile. So that's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. In other news that Expanding Frontiers Research has been working on, some of you may have seen a recent blog post that Erica and I did about cryptocurrency and the UFO community. It was called Following the Money. And in Erica's travels around Utah and keeping a finger on the pulse of the different conferences and events going on, it became apparent that some speakers at a conference in Vernal that was billed as the UFO Disclosure Symposium in mid-2022 had allocated parts of their presentations to promoting cryptocurrency. And I began to look into that when she had told me about it, and she was looking into it, and we saw it across other platforms as well, that certain people named in the article that she and I posted were talking about cryptocurrency on podcasts and other presentations, tweeting about it, using hashtags, and in at least some of these instances, these were very poor investments that were being promoted. At least that's according to some qualified experts on the circumstances. And in one situation, the value of the cryptocurrency discussed had fallen 80% within a few months, and at the time we composed the blog post, it was almost 100%. It had depleted down to about 98%, and it was interesting to us that some of these UFO influencers continued to stand by their prior statements about the cryptocurrencies and pretty much were doubling down on recommending what became known as decentralized finance as a means to invest one's money. And I'd appreciate it if folks would find that. You go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org. You click on the menu at the top of the page where it says blog, and you will see these blog posts that we've been referencing during our discussion tonight. And one of the things we got was for that blog post were records obtained from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Trade Commission. And we're expecting additional documents as well in the coming weeks, and we'll be posting those.
And I just have to say, first of all, you are absolutely brilliant when it comes to doing FOIA and grammar requests. The things that you have done behind the scenes, I think are going to be big bombshells. In fact, I'm really looking forward to it. And I think people don't understand the power of the FOIA. And nobody can tell us more about that besides you and Barry Greenwood. That's an important tool for everyone to use. I mean, even if you're having problems with local government, hold people accountable. I definitely think that this is a way that we can do that in our communities. And let's see, Barry's still having problems. Let's see if we can edit his mic settings. I don't think I can on his side.
Well, Steve Long, I see in chat, has a salient question there. Has EFR asked Brandon Fugel to comment on how he may have been affected by the recent SafeMoon situation? Brandon Fugel does figure rather prominently into the blog post that Erica and I did. And he was a promoter of SafeMoon, and he was tapped for comment on the records we obtained. Our research showed at the times that Mr. Fugel was promoting SafeMoon and literally arguing with people about his competency as a crypto investor. The records we obtained show that serious complaints were being lodged about the management of SafeMoon, and in open source material. I'm talking like run an internet search and there it is. It was being reported that the company was under investigation by various agencies. And so to answer Steve's question, Mr. Fugel somewhat distanced himself from SafeMoon and said that he hasn't been in touch with them in quite a while, hasn't talked to them in a while, and said that last he looked, he had lost some 90% of his investment in SafeMoon.
So to your knowledge, has he ever made a public statement advising the people that he's been influencing on social media to run for the hills?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay.
During the interaction with him, no, I did not ask would he still defend his competency of suggesting investments. No, I did not.
Okay. I mean, and that's such an interesting thing. I mean, to me, I guess, if you're promoting a crypto scheme where there are people that are losing a lot of money, their life savings potentially, as we've seen with a lot of different crypto scams, I would think as a person of integrity that I might go out into the social media forum and then make a public statement and distance myself instead of doing nothing. But that's just me.
Maybe, maybe a lot of things. Perhaps he doesn't give, he and others don't give the consideration they should to the way their words might be weighed by people that consider them knowledgeable, important influences. That would be a best case scenario, pretty much. Some of these influencers should take more responsibility in what they're suggesting other people do with their money.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, absolutely should. I know you can look at some of the Jimmy Fallon. Hey, Barry, nice to see you. We're getting everything together.
Trying to get undiscombobulated here.
You know what? This is live action. This is expanding frontiers.
Funny, my headset just spontaneously shut off. I had to go into my settings and reactivate it. There's no reason for it, but what else is new? There's Chinese balloons flying over us now, so anything can happen.
It's never a dull moment, but
we're probably hooking up through one as we speak.
I'm sure. Yeah, I haven't heard of any passing over New England, but you never know.
And so, Barry, thanks for joining us, and we appreciate it a lot. Everybody that listens just values your input because you are, the world's foremost UFO historian and archivist, and you've also been very instrumental to me. Don't be humble. That's
very strange because I really don't know anything.
You know what? You pretty much know everything, which is fascinating. I just want to say, solar flares. Mario was just saying in private chat, solar flares are an issue today. Okay, so that's making some sense now. That's totally cool. So, what are you? I know that you've been busy and dealing with a lot of things, but what are your thoughts on what's taking place now in the UFO world and Biden and shooting down?
Well, I heard about the Chinese balloon more than a week ago, first being spotted and all, and I figured, that was curious, but it wouldn't necessarily lead to something else, but it did, and it knocked off a UFO hysteria for strange reasons, because really the Chinese balloon was an IFO and it should have stayed at that point, and nothing else should have evolved on it. But it's odd. I can't understand why the UFO part of it a week later started, and not only that, but 3 days in a row. That's very strange because decade after decade you had incidents where UFO sightings were often the subject of air scrambles by the military and find out what they were, but rarely did it get into the press. It was usually a long time after that they would surface at all. But here, it seemed like the authorities were going out of the way to broadcast this, and I have to think, and it's only an opinion, because the information out there now is just so messed up and contradictory, and people are saying different things at different times. But it seemed like the UFO part of it might have been thrown in as a distraction away from the political issues that are involved here. The reporting on the so-called UFOs didn't sound like UFOs, or at least the ones I ever heard of in the past. They were floating objects, they said, were following wind trajectories. That's hardly what part of the phenomenon we've heard about in the past. It sounds like they could have been balloons or someone's experiments gone awry. But they seem to be curling up and over Alaska and down across the United States. I'm sure this has happened in the past, but again, it never made the news cycle. Now it's in the news cycle, and Only the insiders know why. But there's all sorts of speculation going around the world now. After the term UFO was thrown in, the newspapers went crazy. And I have a long list of things I have to check here, and it triggered sightings here and there because of the media coverage. So that just adds to the pile.
And that's absolutely amazing. And again, we do think of distraction, which we've seen UFOs, you and I have talked about in the past week, some of the uses of different countries to use UFOs to distract from testing that's taking place. And you specifically mentioned an example in Russia. Could you tell us a little bit about that as an example?
Yeah, there's a well-known case to UFO researchers from 1977 where the public over there had reported seeing a strange multi-plumed UFO in the sky, and they were quite mystified by it. And Russian authorities, oddly, were encouraging the idea that it was a UFO, and there was a good reason for that, because it was discovered later that this was a rocket launch from a secret base that the Russians operated, and they desired for this sighting, or the series of sightings, to be known as UFOs, to keep the public away from thinking about Russian space activities and military operations. And I just wonder if this is happening somewhat again, using, instead of rockets, balloons, where they're being called UFOs again, getting the public all crazy about it and distracted away from what really might be going on.
And so what would be your guess as to what might be going on here?
Well, I heard today someone, I believe it was in Idaho, said one of their $12 school balloon tests was shot down by the military. And I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but if we're shooting using F-22s to shoot down kids' toy balloons, that's pretty bad. There's an issue there that has to be addressed. $500,000 missile is used to blow it up. Why couldn't they have shot it down if it was what they thought it was, a floating object? That would have saved a lot of money.
That seems a little odd. And it's, where are the regulations for some of these things? And that's what I wondered when I was hearing Biden speak about, the fact that there are these, lots of scientific projects going on. People are launching, private industry launching balloons up into airspace and things. When shouldn't this have been regulated a long time ago?
It may have been, but for some reason it just went out of control, and that's why I think that throwing UFOs into this might have been a distraction because of the political issues with China, and Chinese claim that the balloon was way off course. It was intended for Guam and Hawaii, and I'm wondering, where are their meteorologists that got it so badly wrong that they couldn't steer that balloon over where it was supposed to go, even if it was floating on the wind? It went considerably out of control, but again, it drifted over some sensitive facilities in the U.S. So who knows if that was intentional or not.
Well, and then I don't know if you've I know that you've been busy, but in the news cycle lately, we've seen that Chinese satellites fires green laser beams over Hawaii, and so tensions are mounting. After all of that, and I mean that is really interesting to see some of these things that are getting fed to the public or put out to the public.
Yeah, I mean, I have some catch up to do here, because over the last 2 weeks, I really haven't been able to sit down and look at it carefully the way I used to do. I would sit down for 12 hours at a time and dig information out, but I haven't been able to do that. So I'm behind on a lot of these developments. I saw a photo showing green beams of light coming out of the sky over Hawaii, but I'd like to give it a little more consideration to see what was behind that.
Right. Maybe Travis Taylor's doing something.
Well, hey, everything connects to Skinwalker Ranch now, remember? Everything.
Clearly.
Yeah, yeah. Yep.
Yep, 8 degrees
And
of
with the
Skinwalker
hitchhiker
Ranch.
effect, it's riding balloons everywhere. So that's even
You
worse.
know, Barry, about what you said about the apparent overreactions. I've seen some of these stories too about like uh, a club will say, you know, we launched a balloon and we lost it, and you know, sorry, but it was kind of in the area that one got shot down, stuff like that. What seemed to be overreactions by the military, a couple points I'll throw out for discussion. One is, as Brett Tingley mentioned this afternoon, um, it can be difficult on radar to identify what something that you know is the size of a room may be, and it's difficult for pilots that are, you know, ground mammals moving fast at thousands of feet to get a bead on something visually and know what they're looking at as well. And if we take that thought one step further, it's easy to think there might be some games going on here with either not wanting to the government not wanting to tip their hand of what their radar capabilities are, what their pilots visibility is, combined with pretending that they have less awareness than they have. It's just easy to envision there may be a lot of games going on about the way this information is being packaged and released.
Right, right. Another aspect of it too, to me, and again, I'm just going on partial information for myself. Uh, were the three so-called UFOs seen after the Chinese balloon already known before the military shot them down, known publicly? Because if they weren't known publicly, then why this news release bringing out UFOs all of a sudden? It made no sense to me that the government would do that unless it was some sort of a distraction of against something else.
Environmental disaster in Ohio. I don't know.
Well, yeah, there's a number of things that could.
Reaching at straws. I mean, but yeah, there's definitely a lot going on. Rising tensions over in Taiwan. I mean, there's so many things going on in the world, but that was definitely interesting to see how that shooting down the Chinese balloon and then the subsequent objects that were shot down, how that came into play. But it does raise, for me, and I think for people that like this subject, it does raise questions about. I mean, are there transponders? How do people keep track of things in the atmosphere? And if something is flying at 20,000 feet and hovering over, in the flight path of an airport, what responsibility do the people have that were launching these balloons, whether they're private citizens, whether they're contractors, whether it's a foreign government? I mean, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered here. And I think it would be good to see what sort of protocol is out there for that subject.
Yeah, I mean, and the green laser thing is fascinating because if they're able to project imagery like that in the sky, what else could they do to create false reporting? They could project a laser outline of a spaceship and fool a lot of people and see how effective propaganda might work. Who knows what they have? It's just fascinating how this is all evolving all at once. And I wondered also if part of it might have been it's not only the Chinese. I was concerned that maybe some of these might have been Russian. And if that's the case, that could be seen as a direct assault on the United States by floating surveillance craft over us, and we're reacting in such a way. Maybe to keep it quiet that Russians could be involved too. it's hard to say. It's just a muddle of information right now.
Absolutely, Jack. What are your?
You know, another concern too, just to
Yeah.
get this point, I wondered, given the news events already, if suppose a real alien craft came into the atmosphere and was immediately shot at like that. And there was always a worry about that in the 50s, where Martians or whoever were coming in, and the military was all set with their guns. After all, they shot poor Klaatu as he was coming out to give a present to everybody. So here we go again, blasting away the unknown objects, and that's a concern too.
It is absolutely fascinating. I want to just actually show Amy's comment in chat. There's a bit of irony here or there. 40 years ago, they were able to bounce a laser off a moving shuttle from Maui and use this to test spectroscopic spectroscopic, oh my lord, evaluation of what the shuttle's fuels as a test. And so, I mean, that is quite interesting. And now we know, and we're looking at the capabilities that we're telling people that we have, specifically with the United States of America. I mean, we have a lot of laser technology that is being deployed now by the Navy, and so it's fascinating to see some of these bits and pieces of information that are coming out and the way it potentially is being manipulated to distract people.
Well, I recall Marjorie Taylor Greene talking about Jewish space lasers in one of her crazy speeches, and now we have green lasers in the sky that the Chinese are launching. They're going to get her having a heart attack pretty soon.
It's all, yeah, it's fascinating. And yeah, I mean, Barry, when you mentioned when we talked this week, you mentioned that there was another, over abroad, overseas, there are newspaper reports that are making, the rounds. I think was it Taiwan or China?
It was Hong Kong.
Okay.
Or near Hong Kong. Yeah, I mean, the excessive coverage on UFOs triggered a number of newspapers to report sighting report. And one of them I read in the South China Morning Post, in conjunction with the coverage of U.S. Shooting down UFOs, that they had their own incident over a nearby harbor. And I've since found several more in different parts of the world. So it's kicking off a little teeny bit of UFO reporting here and there, and whether it grows or not, we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating to track, to see whether it's propaganda. I mean, obviously disinformation and then the misinformation, all of these things that are taking place. And then it's also interesting to watch the UFO community and some of the people involved in that community just kind of run with things and say, yes, this is what the government's been keeping from us, and we're finally getting disclosure and all of these things. I mean, Barry, you've been around the block for decades. You've seen the same story. It's just now that
the first thing I thought of when I heard about the Chinese balloon was we were doing this back in the 50s and late 40s with skyhooks, sending instrument packages over the countries to monitor nuclear detonations that could have happened. So, this is a Chinese version of a skyhook balloon being floated over us instead.
And so talk a little bit more about that, because there are people that are listening to the show that don't have the knowledge historically that you might have. So talk about that incident.
Well, you mean skyhooks?
Mm-hmm.
Well, skyhooks, they were a number of launches for different reasons, surveillance, of course, but it was also used for silence, in particular cosmic ray experiments, where they would send up packages of photographic plates to be able to trap the image of a cosmic ray coming in. And it led to some significant discoveries. And one in particular that was fascinating was it was a skyhook launch from Texas in early February 1954, where it drifted across the southern states with a package, and picked up cosmic rays, and the balloon was scheduled to drop the package after a certain amount of time, and the rest of the balloon would float out to sea and disappear into the water. But there was a chase plane that followed the balloon for a period of time, and that pilot had reported seeing funny objects near the balloon, and he made a record of it, filled out a form, but I'm not sure he knew this at the time, but the balloon itself had a downward facing camera, and that camera picked up the objects, and it showed sort of a V formation of roundish, I'll call them objects. They didn't look like lights. They looked more like darker shapes, but there's a very poor reproduction of it in the Project Blue Book files. That information went to Naval Intelligence, and there was no information at all about what the Naval Intelligence found concerning the photograph, but the pilot's report went into Project Blue Book. And I found it years later. I was just browsing through the files, and I was fascinated because apparently the experiment was connected to some of the first discoveries about antiprotons that scientists were probing to see if they could actually get physical evidence. And it was widely reported in the newspapers. That balloon was the subject of these stories, yet no mention was made at all of the UFO things that were nearby, even though they were well documented with the photograph and with the pilot's report. It appeared to be no particular resolution of that story. And it's just one of those funny little puzzles of the past that are little known.
How fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that, because there's so much history. And I know that there are people out there who are saying we don't need to know the history of the subject. We just need to move from here on out.
Yeah.
And that is so ludicrous to me. Because the history,
you don't have a concept of history, you're losing out. You're not understanding the subject at all. A lot of people may be familiar with Thomas Mantell, who died chasing a flying object in 1948. That was what to me anyway seemed to be a skyhook balloon that was launched from Minnesota. He described it very clearly. It was described in terms of shape and direction and so on before Mantell. And it was also spotted after Mantell had crashed over Nashville, Tennessee. But every indication was that was a skyhook that was launched again and tracked. According to Charles Moore, who directed that launch, he said one of the things they did to find out where balloons would be to listen to UFO reports on the radio. And they knew where their balloon was because it was such a large, obvious thing in the sky, especially on clear days, that you could just count on people reporting something like that. So again, it's another UFO incident that was probably explainable that way. Fascinating to me.
well, it is fascinating, and it is fascinating that the powers that be would actually use UFO organizations to track what they're testing. And to
That's yeah. I mean, there's a history of that too. I mean, if you recall the Robertson Panel report by the CIA released in 1953, they wanted media people to get involved with flying saucer reporting and talk about it, and of course debunk it from their point of view. But they wanted Walt Disney and Arthur Godfrey, another personality who's probably forgotten now, but he was quite popular in the 50s and early 60s. So yeah, there was a concerted effort to use people like that to spread misinformation about the subject and distract people again from what may have been going on.
and that is so fascinating. And Jack, what do you have to say about that? You might have something.
I do have something. As fate would have it, Barry, the National Archives, NARA, informed me today that a FOIA request I made a couple of years ago on Frederick Durant III they have completed the processing. I was awaiting about 60 pages. They said that they found that apparently had not been processed and released previously. FBI records on Frederick Durant. And for those unaware, he actually wrote the Robertson panel report. He was a CIA officer or consultant that worked with the panel and composed the meetings of those days, and then went on to have various interactions and arose at different times with NICAP stories. And so I had done a FOIA request on him, but I responded today that I did indeed want a price quote for those few dozen pages that they have now processed, and I'll be posting that as soon as they deliver it to me.
Oh, great. And that it's bound to be still unseen information there that we haven't unearthed yet. Not necessarily our fault for not looking hard enough. They just hold it back and don't let you know it exists.
This is true. And as I'm sure Barry's aware, that has gotten even more complicated in over the years, rather than it getting a little easier to obtain information. Agencies now don't have to acknowledge responsive records if they're classified. So that kind of puts you in a position that if you're given a no responsive records, you might just keep asking indefinitely.
Oh, yeah. That's what I found, that if you can ask for something at one time and they'll say, we don't have anything. And then a few years later, ask for the same thing. Oh, yeah, here it is. Like nothing. And it just irritated me that we had to waste a lot of time chasing things that we should have had a lot earlier than we did.
Absolutely. Now, to play the devil's advocate, I can understand to a certain extent that if I'm the FBI or the CIA and I have something that's classified, I don't want to play 20 questions with it. Like, I'm not going to let requesters ask me things about it that I keep saying, I can't release it. And through their series of questions of me saying the material exists, but it's classified, I've essentially told them then what I have. Like if you ask for records on Durant and they say, yeah, we've got a few dozen, but you can't have them. Well, I mean, they're there. So I can kind of understand, like, if we're talking a weapon or something, like that, but it gets really dysfunctional over time. Like we had an appeal denied on the Office of Policy Coordination, that the FBI, rather than ask the CIA, I asked the FBI for any responsive records on the CIA's Office of Policy Coordination. And they acknowledged records exist, but withheld them in full. And we appealed that, and the appeal was upheld. So we are considering suing for that, along with a number of other cases that sometimes our appeals are remanded and sometimes they're not. So the next step would then be to sue for the records. And we have a couple choices of attorneys that will do that for the filing fees. So in other words, pro bono, but fees still must be paid to the court.
Mm.
So anyone that would like to support this kind of work, please do go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org and join our supporters that are giving us financial contributions through the safe and secure PayPal button there to help with this kind of work. And back to the point, yeah, Barry, there's still withholding records of a 1952 office and citing exemptions about that, it shows sources and means and things like that. And it's like, come on, at some point you've got to update this stuff. I mean, this was 70 years ago that you're saying that this could that this potentially interferes with law enforcement investigation. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we were essentially working in the blind back in the 70s when we first started using FOIA, trying to track down documents. We would know something about a few, we would ask for those, and those could be supplied usually. And then those contained information which alluded to other documents which we didn't know much about. So we would ask about that, and the answer we would get would be, look, we don't answer questions. Just ask for a document and we'll send it out to you. So, I mean, if it's something that's classified and there's no public information about it, how do you get it? And we had to work and piece together the documents from various sources. And sometimes we could extract things that way, but often we couldn't, and they're still sitting there somewhere classified. And so there's still UFO history out there. There's recent history, there's history, and then there's ancient history. And something from 1952, I would call ancient history now. In context of modern times, the technology was different, the politics were different, but they will still sit on things from that era.
Yeah, that reminds me of the argument that because it might embarrass an agency doesn't justify keeping it classified. Another thing, the point you're making there, James Carrion and I ran into a few years ago, is he had located records about joint security control, a division that he located records from 1946-47 timeframe that indicated this division was authorized to do deception operations during peacetime, and that they were to design and implement deception operations. And we tried to get records of these operations, and NARA told us that we had to be more specific and name the files, name the records, name the projects. And of course, that's impossible. The only reference we have is the records that James had already found that stated they exist. So that's, all I got for you, Mr. FOIA officer, is here's proof they exist. And they're telling us, well, if you can't tell us where to look for them, that's how this works. So you get no more records.
Yeah.
And so that's just a dysfunctional loop there.
Yeah. It always made me wonder why anything was released on the Civil War, because that was a terrorist operation against the United States of America, and given modern politics, they could sit on things like that for political reasons and never release important Civil War data. I mean, it gets extreme, and it has to be a line drawn somewhere, a time frame. They do have time frames upon which to finally release information, but they don't follow it.
No.
There's a law, and if they don't enforce the law, there is no law. So
Right.
it still is a lot of withheld data, and we might be surprised by what's in there.
That's my general pessimism about these UFO reports, UAP reports that are supposed to be composed and given to Congress, is the bureaucracies are so bad anyway that when we're talking about a complex subject that goes back decades and decades, that I can reasonably assume the people assigned the task don't even want to be doing it. That I'm just cynical about what we're going to expect from reports like that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of the first UAP task force report last year, where that's a study of whatever they had received up to that time, and it dated back to the early 2000s. Yet I find out that the task force was overseen in part by Skinwalker Ranch people.
Right.
And I wonder if the conclusions given in those reports are valid, because the people there that have a vested interest in establishing a mystery and preserving it. And if you recall the statistics, 143 out of 144 reports were unidentified. That's insane. Nothing was even close to that in government studies with regard to unknowns as opposed to identified. But now it's come down to somewhere around 50% this year, probably because the folks that did the first report are not there now.
And we were talking about that earlier, Erica and I were. That's like the definition of a conflict of interest. Is that you're working on government funds while you have a financial interest. Your income is in proportion to this remaining a mystery, is the definition of a conflict of interest.
The people making the determinations on some of these reports have a television show that they're getting paid for to present that topic as mysterious. I can't imagine a bigger conflict of interest than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I chuckle because it's like you'll look around social media and you'll be like, what do I just speak Greek here or something? But so I like laugh that, well, thank you, for not just like acting like these words mean something they don't. That is what a conflict of interest is. Yeah.
Amazing.
And so, Barry, I have to ask you, and just kind of go with, I've got one question to ask from Peter, Shadowy Spectrum. Speaking of old government documents, are there any from 1890s that address the Great Airship Mystery?
I tried to find that out. I actually contacted the President McKinley Presidential Library and asked them that question. And I don't know if it elicited giggles or not from them, but they sent me a straight answer back and said we couldn't locate anything on that particular topic. I don't know. It's plausible. It didn't go as far as the White House. I mean, what are they going to do? Send stealth balloons after them to try to shoot them down? I mean, the technology didn't exist to deal with that at that time. So no, I don't know of any government. I do know of government documents before that, though, and I may have alluded to it before in the past on past shows where we did find material related to so-called UFO sightings. They were called blue lights, and that came from the War of 1812, and the Congress investigated them. And they couldn't determine what they were. There was suspected spy activity by British sympathizers trying to betray an American fleet that was trying to run a blockade. And blue lights were seen, and there was thought these were signals to the British, and the fleet never ran the blockade. But the reports were sent in, particularly the commander of the American fleet, Stephen Decatur, was furious. He thought that all of New London should have been thrown into jail for ratting out his fleet. But Congress looked into it, and there was no particular evidence that pointed to a cause for it. So literally, these lights went down as unidentified flying or aerial objects. And that's the way it went into the books. So yeah, there were government documents back then.
How fascinating. I mean, the whole subject, I think there's a reason that all of us are here. That the subject is fascinating. Whether there's extraterrestrial life, which is yet to be proven, this is a really rich subject in many, many ways. And so I appreciate your knowledge, Barry, and I appreciate all the work that you've done. And we have to definitely talk about Clear Intent again. If none of you have seen Repo Man, then I would definitely suggest dusting that off or like finding it, because that was one of my favorite cult classics in the 80s. Was it 80s or 90s? It was 80s, right?
84.
Yep. Oh, Lord. I mean, I was actually like 5 years old when that came out.
Yeah.
So it's all good. But in a scene from that movie, Barry's Clear Intent.
Yeah. Quickly.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen the movie in the theaters, but I was alerted to it later on by my the agent for Clear Intent, John White. And he said, you got to take a look at that movie. So much later, I got a videotape, and I looked at it, and about 45 minutes in, it shows a car thief getting out of a car and going to a phone booth. I'm looking at it. I'm saying there's something terribly familiar about that. So I had to freeze frame to see it, and he had a clipboard with some papers on it, and on the back of the clipboard, which was facing the camera, it had a document that said top secret, and I couldn't see much else, but I recognized the formatting. It was a flyer that I had prepared the year before Clear Intent was released, announcing that it was coming out and what it was dealing with. And it was on the back of this clipboard in the movie. Now, if you recall the topic of the movie, it was about an alien that was locked up in the trunk of a car that was stolen. And that's what repo men do. They take cars and repossess them. So, and ultimately the car took off into space on its own. But I was stunned when I saw the flyer used. I thought it was some sort of subliminal advertising, suggesting, it's an alien movie. Here's a little alien thing. You may not recognize it, but I did. And
Wow.
I still get a kick out of seeing it.
So did you ever talk to any of the producers or anybody involved with the movie?
Involved with the movie, no, but there's a fellow who has a website totally devoted to Repo Man. He has every imaginable bit of trivia in there, and he didn't know about that. I told him, I said, did you look at Lagarto's clipboard in the movie? And he said, no. What do you mean? I said, the flyer on the back. And then I sent him a copy of the flyer, which is a perfect match for what was in the movie. And he said, I never saw that before. So he went out of his way to incorporate it into his website. And he's got a copy of the flyer up on the site to show people who were into the movie what that really meant. Nobody knew what that meant until I saw it.
That is so cool. I love that. I remember when I was 5 years old watching that movie and how cool that was. I mean, obviously we know I wasn't 5 and clearly my acting skills are questionable, but anyway, I watched that movie and I loved it. And I used to have, and I'm so bummed that I think it got tossed away, but I had an original movie poster from Repo Man, but maybe I can find that somewhere. But it's just,
I still have to send you those screenshots.
Yeah.
I haven't sent them yet, but I have them.
I would love that. It's amazing. And thank you, both of you, for joining me tonight. And also thank you for being a part of expanding Frontiers Research. I'm really grateful to have both of you on board. I'm grateful to people that are supporting the show and going to, like Jack mentioned earlier, expandingfrontiersresearch.org to subscribe so you can get the latest blog and also show your support. This isn't something, this has been a labor of love, and so far we haven't made enough money to justify the websites, to the FOIA requests, time spent. And so it is really critical that we get public support for this. It's all tax deductible since we're a nonprofit, and we've got a lot of things that we are working on that are really going to be very significant in a number of areas. And so we encourage all of you and thank all of you for the interest and supporting us. This is important. I absolutely am wholeheartedly, I know that this is important. So thank you to all of you who have been there and supported UFO Classified, and that are still helping support the show costs now that have extended over into Expanding Frontiers. And please go and support. And again, every time I get in here on a Friday night, I love seeing Steve and Jim and Peter and Ken and Amy and Drew and all of you who get in here and ask really important questions that follow the subject, that are respectful, that want to see people involved in the subject that have ethical boundaries, that are behaving in a way that will bring this subject, however it is, forward in a positive and productive light. So I thank both of you. I'm looking forward to having you on the show more. And Jack, of course, you and I are stirring up trouble. Not trouble, but we're actually doing some great work behind the scenes to do exposés on everything. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done on Skinwalker Ranch, on Phenomicon, on cryptocurrency. This is groundbreaking stuff, and I'm happy to be a part of that. So thank you both.
You bet.
Thank you to both of you as well, and everyone listening and watching. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, boy. I can't wait to talk. Next week, I'm thinking, if my friend is willing to do this, I'm going to have one of my best friends from the age of 19 on, Matt Hepworth. And Matt was he was a sound guy in my band, one of my first bands, and did sound many times over the years. He also was with me the first time I went to Skinwalker Ranch. He was with me when I went to Contact in the Desert and interviewed Lynn Katai and Steve Bassett and Nick Redfern and some of these people. And so he's been with me. And of course he does not, he looks at this subject kind of as like, what are you doing? He's always been like very kind, and he's been there in many different phases of my life: music, UFOs, all this Skinwalker stuff. And so it'll be fun. And he's also one of the most brilliant musicians that I have ever known. He, oh my gosh, he plays bass, keyboards, everything, guitar. And so maybe I will be broadcasting, hopefully, out from his place. Maybe we can get him to play a little bass. Maybe he can play some old footage and maybe some of my old gigs that he recorded.
Wow.
I know. We'll see how that one works out. I don't know. But knowing him, it'll be fun. And he also, a few years back, recorded, there was an incident that he recorded with night vision of an object, probably a military helicopter, that was hovering over a neighborhood. And it wasn't visible with the naked eye, but he captured that footage because he's also a brilliant photographer and videographer. And then he also captured some fast-moving white objects that had moved across the Salt Lake Valley. And so he's got some good stuff. So I'm really excited. So hopefully next week, Matt Hepworth will be here. And again, I want to thank you all. And so I'm just putting that little teaser out there. I can't wait, Jack, for our work coming up. And Barry, thank you so much. I will definitely touch base with both of you later. And I want to thank, again, everybody listening. I want to thank Peter and Mario. Mario has been such a great support for me over the years. I really appreciate it. And so all of you stay safe, and we will catch you next week.